Well, they were just working people and raised a big family, 7 kids. I'm only one left in the family. My older brother worked for Stark's Nursery quite a bit. My 2 brothers, younger than me, one of them retired out of the Navy and the other one was in the Navy, and he didn't finish 20 years. He came out and got in the trucking business. Well, we just old red dirt farmers. I was the 3rd one from the top. And we all worked, all of us kids worked. We raised strawberries and tomatoes and corn and hay and just what you ordinarily raise on the farm. Well, I never worked outside the home except the time I worked for a nursery and maybe helped the neighbors some when I was a kid. The nursery, what part that I worked in was in Farmington, where all the building has gone on the east side of the road. That was all nursery country in there. There wasn't any houses. And I set grafts. That's when if you know what a graft is, in the wintertime, the employees of the nursery, they had a big warehouse somewhere out there in that area where they had a farm, where they leased that place. And they made grafts. Now, what I understand about those grafts is they take the roots of different fruit trees and they graft in whatever fruit tree they want to grow. If they wanted apples, they wanted Grimes golden apples. That was real popular back in those days. Delicious apples. They grafted into those roots that part of I guess you'd call it limbs are from the trees, you know. And they made thousands of those things all winter long. And the way they did, they would graft this into the root, and they'd wrap it with tape and bury it in sawdust till they got ready to set them the next spring. There was a big 2-story white house, and the person who managed the nursery was named Bentley, Al Bentley. And of course, Hobo worked for Al Bentley. He was the nursery boss, field boss. I don't know whatever happened to the Bentleys. As time went on, why Starks didn't lease that land anymore, and I don't know who owned that land when it was sold to go into that housing project out there and business project. Starks had they had a big barn there, and they used mules. They had the best of mules. Their equipment was good, and they had about 6 or 8 teams of mules there, and they had I can remember a fellow by the name of Earl Clayton and Briscoe. I can't remember his first name, but I can remember they had their own teams, you know. And they had a man that took care of the barn, the harness, and his brother, right about where that Shell station is there in Farmington. There used to be a little yellow house there, about a 4-room house. And a man that took care of the stables and fed the mules lived there in that house. Well, they had ground leased a lot, all over this area here. They weren't a small outfit, and they always fenced those places off with chicken wire to keep the rabbits out of there from injuring their trees, you know. And I know people used to, they let people go in there and hunt rabbits if they then, you know, make sure there was no rabbits in there, because the rabbits will eat the bark off of the tree, you know, and that ruins it, it kills it. We used to have land leased next to our place, and those guys used to water their mules at our house, and we had a big old maple tree in the front yard, and that's where they ate lunch. Well, we lived on Little Elm Road. Just that place we lived on, the Highway 62 went diagonal through that place. There was 40 acres on the east side and 40 acres on the west side. What I remember about Farmington, when I was a little kid, my dad used to, when my mother would color chickens, and my dad would haul them to Fayetteville in a wagon and team. And I remember going through Farmington to Fayetteville, and it was just an old gravel road then, full of jug holes. I remember going through Farmington and past the grocery store there in Farmington. There's only one filling station in Farmington. White, I can't remember her name, but she ran the store, and her husband drove I believe a oil delivery truck, delivered gasoline to stations. And she ran that for a long time. Ever since she's run it, when the long as I could remember, a long time after. When you went through Farmington, if you batted your eye, you missed it, even in a wagon. Walnut Grove School and Farmington School. Well, that's about it. I didn't graduate out of Farmington because I went into service. I wanted to join the Marines, and I was 17. My dad wouldn't sign my papers. I had to wait. And as soon as I got 18, I went into the Navy. I don't remember. I went to 8th grade at Walnut Grove, and I guess 2-3 years at Farmington. I don't remember. Old Professor Broyles was a professor at that time there. You know, he lived in that as you by the McDonald restaurant out there, where that stop sign is. That big 2-story white house that's on the corner. It's an old house, big 2-story. I know that as Professor Broyles' house. I knew the Briscoes. I knew the Doties. There was one kid by the name of Holland. One by the name of Clark Spears. As far as I know, all these people are dead now. I know Clark Spears is dead now. Sports, I never heard of football till I guess I was in the 7th or 8th grade. And Farmington didn't have a football team. They had a basketball team outside court. They were older than I was, the players were. They were high school. They was at 11th, 12th grade, and I was a freshman. Well, they used to have community parties. Kids in the community, somebody would have a yard party for the kids, you know. And we used to go swimming down on the Illinois River, the old swimming hole. I never did go fishing because my dad always kept us busy. We didn't have time to fish. So I guess that's the reason I'm not a fisherman. If you raised what you ate and ate what you raised. So my mother, we always had a big garden. My mother canned, and Dad raised potatoes and had a sugar cane. There was a molasses mill right close by. We had molasses, and we come home from school, we'd have to, my dad and my mother would pick peas and beans, and then when we come home from school, we had to thresh them out, get the beans and the peas out of the hulls, and we'd have probably a big lard can full of peas and beans. That's winter food. Well, my dad used to raise hogs, and he was always raised a lot of corn, and he raised hogs. But I'll tell you, back in those days, you took eggs and cream to town on a Saturday to buy your flour and your coffee and other grocery needs you couldn't raise on the farm. Prairie Grove used to have a couple produce houses over there, and it was a smidgen closer to Prairie Grove than it was to Farmington. And Prairie Grove was more of a progressive. Prairie Grove was a town, you know. Farmington was really just a village. You know, when you didn't have electricity, you didn't have cars. When you worked from sun up till sundown, you was ready to go to bed. But families, on occasion, like one family would have a birthday, they'd have a birthday dinner for them, you know. And there just wasn't too much social life back in those days. Heck, that was after Roosevelt was elected and finally got the REA, which is Ozark Electric now. You had the old chain pull lights, and you had a light and had a chain, you pull it off and on, and that's about it. Well, it wasn't really no big deal. You had to wait until, if you lived down at the end of the road, you waited longer than anyone else, you know. You didn't have ice then unless you bought 50-pound ice and tried to keep it from melting and let it last as long as it would. When I went into service, Farmington was just a village. And I came out, and I wasn't out too long till I left here. And I went to Illinois. And I lived up there. We lived up there 45 years. So Farmington kind of grew into a city over a period of that many years, you know. We left, I guess, in 45 or 46. And I came back, well, I've been retired 31 years. So I came back in 1986 or 7. Unbelievable changes. I still can't figure out all the people that has come to, see, Fayetteville wasn't a great big city until, well, when I left here it wasn't, but when I came back the growth had started as we changed from wartime to back to civilian time, you know. All the factories had converted into war material, making war material. Well, after 1943, I guess it was, the first new Chevys come into Fayetteville. And then industry had gone back to civilian use. Well, one thing that surprised me, I don't know anyone out there anymore. That surprised me. I go to Farmington, and when that restaurant was open out there, we always went out there to eat a couple times a week or every week. And I look at people, and I don't know anyone. They're all dead. The people that I knew are all gone. People I was raised with, even Prairie Grove. I don't know anyone in Prairie Grove anymore. They're all dead. One thing, has anyone ever told you about the Fruit Growers Association? Well, see, the railroad used to come through Farmington. And they have a market for apples and grapes and strawberries. They formed a Fruit Growers Association. And Fruit Growers Association, see, strawberry crates came, they weren't assembled. The association would let the growers get the crates and the baskets for grapes and what have you, and they take them home and they put them together, they assemble them. So then when the members of the board on the Fruit Growers Association, they had buyers that come in here. You know, they could contact buyers out of Dallas, Kansas City, and places where they didn't grow this stuff, see? And they'd come in here in big trucks and buy it. And then they'd ship some of it out on to different places. And the last year, before the association broke up, my dad hauled, I believe, a crate of tomatoes had 24 quarts in it. And when it come time, they would sell it, the association would sell this, and then at the end of the season, what you took in, you would get your money from the sale of the fruit. And the last year that I think I'm right about this, the last year that association operated, my dad, I think he had 224 crates of berries, and he got a check for $28. Something happened. I don't know what it was. A lot of talk about it, but I don't know if there's any truth in it or not. The railroad was here when, I don't know when that railroad came through here. That railroad went on to Westville, Oklahoma. And after, when there's no business, they took it out. I can't even remember what year they took that out. But the railroad down that Methodist church where Joyce goes there, where Joyce Dorman or Cunningham goes to church, that railroad went right through there on to Lincoln, and from Lincoln to Westville. I know Walnut Grove School was just less than a quarter of a mile, half a quarter, I guess, the railroad went by the school, and I can still hear that old whistle blowing and steam coming out of that old locomotive. Every time I hear a whistle blow, I think of those days when I'd sit in the classroom and watch that train go by. What was it like? Well, everybody was poor, so we didn't know what being rich was, so everybody was, as far as they was concerned, they was rich, but they didn't have nothing, because they didn't know what being rich was. Well, my dad had what they called a Sarah, a real nice leather seats and all, like a buggy. And the only time I remember going to Fayetteville, he always went in a wagon. I don't know why he didn't go in that Sarah, but you couldn't haul anything in that Sarah but 2 cans of cream and a crate of eggs. And when you went to Fayetteville, you had chickens, and my mother colored chicken. You had different potatoes. You'd take them to Fayetteville. And you remember where Guy Singer's place is? Down the street, towards the jail. There used to be a produce house there, and that's where we'd take them to. Bacon, 3 cents a pound. You didn't get much for anything you sold. Well, we all gripe about how high things are, groceries and anything you buy. But let me tell you something. If you look at your house now, you sleep warm. You don't have fireplaces to keep warm by. You don't have to keep your fireplace going, get up at night and chuck the fire. You walk in your house, you flip a switch, you got lights. If you want a cold drink, go to your refrigerator. You didn't have all of that, see. Things are far better now, even though as high as they are. I don't want to go back to when you had to sleep on a feather bed and 2 or 3 big comforts on top of you. I don't want to go back to those days. When get up in the morning and unless you kept the house warm, your water bucket, the dipper was frozen in the water bucket. I don't want to go back to those days. We have it a lot better than people want to admit. Well, people nowadays didn't live in those days. See, when I was raised, my dad was a disciplinarian. He was an old Methodist. And you told the mark, he didn't put up with any foolishness. Kids nowadays have all kinds of freedom that I didn't have. And if you've got good Christian parents, and teach that to your kids, would make a lot of difference, but that don't go on today. I don't say they're not Christian people, but you didn't have a car to get in. You didn't have a school having activities every night that you had to take your kids to, and you didn't have a transportation to take them if they did have it. And nowadays, kids are involved in so many things nowadays. You didn't have high school football back in those days. Maybe Fayetteville did, I don't remember. But nowadays, if I would give a kid advice now, listen to your parents. hopefully your parents will teach you some, instill in you character, a belief in God. Because every one of us today, we're creatures of our younger environment. And you didn't have dope then, like you got today. Never heard of it. I would say it would be, if they have a family, it's a good place to raise a family. And it still is a good place to raise a family. And I admire the fathers in Farmington, when they upgrade the town and they build it right. It's attractive. And Farmington, everything they do it upright. Look at their senior citizens out there, the building. And I admire those people for doing that. My favorite thing about Farmington is that I admire the city fathers of Farmington, the way they have laid out the town first class.